This lesson is on introductions and conclusions, and it goes along with the essay vocabulary and the composition process lesson, as well as the lesson entitled Outlining and the Hierarchy of Ideas. And so this is the third and final lesson of a series on essay writing for claims-based as well as informative or explanatory essays. So after this, really, there's nothing more for you to learn about essay structure and form, but there's a whole lot of practice that we're going to do. So let's get started. Right, so remember some of the pointers and strategies and processes that we've gone over in previous lessons, right? You want to write your thesis first, or your main idea statement if it's more of an informative essay. Then you write your topic sentences. You want to make sure those connect well to your thesis. Then you put in your evidence and commentary. In other words, you build out those body paragraphs. And then finally, you write your introduction and conclusion, and that's what I want to talk about today. Right, so remember that an introduction has three parts. It has a theme sentence, it has a hook, it has enumeration, and it has a thesis. This is kind of known as the funnel technique, right? Because you're gradually funneling your reader from the general to the intermediate and the big ideas of the paper to the thesis, which is the specific idea of the paper. And so that's why it's kind of like a funnel here. All right, so what does a theme sentence do? It's also kind of known as the hook, right? Your theme sentence needs to make a broad statement about the topic or problem or question that the essay will address. You're not going to really make an argument. You're just going to let your reader know that this question exists or that this topic is important. It's not the thesis. Some teachers, usually history teachers, sometimes science teachers as well, but usually those history teachers, they're going to want you to put the thesis first as the very first sentence of the essay. This isn't the funnel technique. It's effective, especially for history papers, although literary analysis and research papers, I don't know, I think the funnel technique is going to work a lot better than leading with that thesis. But it is direct, and you've heard me talk about how important it is to be direct in your writing. Right, so here's some examples of possible theme sentences, right, that make a broad statement. And you don't necessarily need to write these down. I just wanted to give you some examples, right? So computer gaming has had a large impact on the education of boys over the past 2 decades. Right, so I'm making a broad statement. I'm going to assume that this essay is going to have something to do with computer gaming and education in boys. Or atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are changing the chemistry of the world's oceans, seas, and large lakes. Right, I'm just making a broad statement here. I would assume this essay is going to have something to do with carbon dioxide and ocean acidification, maybe something about global warming or fossil fuels. But mainly it's going to have something to do with the carbon dioxide and the carbon cycle in the world's major waters. Another strategy that you can use for your theme sentence is to introduce a question. I think starting by asking a question is, it's an okay strategy. It's kind of okay when freshmen do it. It gets really stale, though. It's one of those strategies that gets overused. And so, personally, as your instructor, I have no problem if you do this once or twice a year. But if every single essay starts with a flat-out question, that's really, it just gets lame. I'm sorry. Maybe that sounds harsh, but it just gets lame. So we want to introduce the fact that a question exists. So we can say things like, many people wonder whether genetically modified organisms are harmful to their health. That's that broad statement that lets the reader know there's some kind of question about GMOs and health. Or one question that has puzzled historians for decades is whether Shakespeare wrote all of the plays that are credited to him. Right? I don't start the essay with, did Shakespeare write all these plays? You could do that, especially if you're a freshman or you're a middle schooler. But honestly, by the time you're a junior and senior in high school, that move is so stale that, up your game and just introduce the question. You can also state that the problem exists, right? Something to the effect of, scientists are struggling to invent new forms of energy production that are clean, cheap, and reliable. If I see a theme sentence like this, I'm going to assume that this reader is going to explore this question and this problem, and maybe even make an argument about it if it seems like it becomes a persuasive piece. Or, something like concussions have become a serious issue in high school football. I'm going to assume that the writer here is going to explore that issue and maybe make some recommendations for improvement, maybe not. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is write our enumeration. And this is where we list the major topics of the essay. In other words, what the body paragraphs are about. What we do here is kind of list off or number off, first, second, third, fourth. We number off the main ideas of that paper, right? In fact, the root word of enumeration is the word for number or numeral. And so this is why we outline the body paragraphs first. It's very difficult to write your theme sentence and almost impossible to write your enumeration without a clear sense of what's in those body paragraphs. So some examples of enumeration statements, right? Genetically modified organisms have advantages such as drought and pest resistance. They also have drawbacks such as their costs and potential to change ecosystems, right? So when I'm looking at this enumeration statement, I'm going to assume that the student's either going to do one or two paragraphs about advantages, maybe one paragraph about drought resistance, one paragraph about pest resistance, or one big paragraph about both. I'm also going to assume that the writer's going to talk about the drawbacks, either in one big or two smaller paragraphs, but something to do with costs and danger or change in ecosystems. That's the way, we read essays. Or another example of enumeration here, right? As athletes become stronger and faster, they hit harder, causing more brain damage. This brain damage is affecting student athletes who are reporting greater academic and behavioral problems. So I would assume that this student writer or this essay writer is going to give me a paragraph or two about changes in the game as far as like size and speed and intensity of hits. And then I'm also going to assume they're going to give me one, maybe two or three paragraphs about impacts on athletes, specifically academics and behavioral problems. That's what this enumeration statement signals to the reader. And again, both of these essays, the writers definitely have a clear sense of what they're going to do with the body paragraphs. Again, that's why we outline those body paragraphs before we start messing around with the introduction. And then finally you come in with your thesis, which, as you know, makes that single claim, that very strong, direct claim. It answers the driving question or responds to the prompt and is very clear and strong. So some examples of thesis statements, right? After considering the evidence for both sides, genetically modified organisms are a bad idea, right? It's very clear what this person is going to prove to us. And as we read this, we're going to look at their evidence and reasoning and try to figure out if this writer knows what the heck they're talking about and whether they have a strong argument. Or the other example here, while concussions are causing some problems for American student athletes, better hitting and tackling techniques will reduce their frequency and severity. Right, so I assume this student with their very strong thesis is going to tell me that concussions are kind of a problem, but the solution is better football technique, not, I don't know, giving up and not playing football or something like that. All right, so look at these examples, and I've already read these sentences to you. These came through the previous slides, but this student writer starts by introducing a question, then they show both sides of that question, and then finally they come in with a thesis that makes a strong point and a strong argument. Or, this student writer starts out by stating that there is a problem or a concern. Then they outline the nature of the concern and what's driving it. But then they flip it over and, really they admit that there's a problem, but they're going to point towards the solution in better football play, which kind of be an interesting paper. Right? Now, so now the conclusion is kind of the opposite of the thesis, right? It does the same things, but almost backwards, right? It restates the thesis, then it goes through the enumeration again and reviews the big points, which may seem repetitive to you, but especially in a longer essay, when you start writing like 5 and 10 page essays, it's easy for your reader to forget what happened in the body paragraphs early on. Body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2. So by reviewing the enumeration and going through those main ideas again, you show your audience how everything connects, right? Because you restate the thesis, you go through the big ideas again, then that reader can see what the big picture is, after, really focusing on the details for, maybe the last 2 to 10 paragraphs worth of argument that you've gone through or information that you've gone through. And then finally you end with that conclusion or closing where you connect everything back to the big world, the real world, the big questions, the big ideas, the so what factors, and you really try to sell your audience on why this stuff matters and to a degree why they should remember and why they should care. So that conclusion is kind of a mirror introduction of, the essay. Or I'm sorry, a mirror introduction. The conclusion's a mirror of the introduction. Sorry, I'm falling all over my mouth. So some examples of conclusions here. Right, while student athletes, their parents and coaches should continue to be concerned about concussions, better techniques can reduce the danger of football. So there's my restated thesis. Improve tackling positions, approaches, and practice. In other words, a return to proper football fundamentals have already improved the safety of the sport. Likewise, better use of the hands and shoulders for hitting on the line have reduced concussions for some teams and some leagues. Okay, so I've repeated some of the big ideas that I've examined in the body paragraphs. And finally, I leave with the big idea and the big connection to the real world. Football is a great sport that teaches young men discipline, toughness, focus, and perseverance. And with better play, athletes can enjoy the sport they love while avoiding life-threatening and life-limiting brain injuries. Right, so I kind of left with that big idea once again, this mirror of my theme sentence. Or let's look at another example right here. The evidence that shows that genetically modified organisms are not worth the risks to the environment and human health. So I'm stating my thesis again. I'm making my argument. They change the balance of flora, fauna, and soils in areas where they are planted in ways that far outweigh any benefits they bring. They are also too expensive to be cost effective for small farmers in the United States and around the world. So I've gone through my enumeration again. And finally, they are a danger to our world and should not be used under any circumstances. And so final reminders here, things I've already mentioned throughout this lesson. I guess this is my conclusion, right? Essays move from the general to the specific and back to the general again, right? So the signals you put into the enumeration and re-enumeration show and remind your audience what the big ideas of the paper are. And finally, introductions and conclusions are easier to write if you have outlined the body paragraphs, because then you'll know what to put into them. So always do that thesis, topic, sentence, then flesh out the body paragraphs, and only then start messing around with your intro and conclusion. And so that's it. Thanks for watching.